Hey everybody, it's Nikki Wiedemann with Dead Ringers, and so glad to have you here today. We know it's summertime, and I'm sure this has been on your calendar for I can't wait to sit in on a webinar, but we're excited to have you. And that being said, it is recorded, so if you have folks that are on vacation today, we will have that recording for you. But so happy to be here today to talk about answering services and kind of the do's and don'ts around what we can do within the profession to do a better job in answering the phone. And if you're familiar with our other Dead Ringer topics, we know there are lots of things that we need to do to create a good customer experience. And it all starts with that very first phone call. And whether it's you answering it or an answering service, there's so many things to keep in mind. So I have a friend and a guest here today, Craig Meehan from the ASD Corp company answering service. And he's going to give a little insight, and I'm really excited. And for those of you who sat in on our last webinar, we were talking all about numbers. So Geeks Unite, we have another webinar today that will have some key metrics, but we think it's important to measure what's going well and what's not going well. And so Craig has a lot of great insight on some studies that they have done. I can kind of back up that information based on what we've learned and all of the mystery calls that we've placed. And we're probably close to 50,000, I think, at this point in our short little history of 9 years. So we have really an economies of scale now. I guess that might be the right word, but we're excited to learn about what can really help you in your business as far as an answering service is concerned. So talk about some do's and don'ts. Craig will guide us in some of those particular areas. And then what can make or break the trust of someone with a call. And I know that our calls that we place, it's I don't want to say it's an imaginary situation, but it is not necessarily a true family member. And we've heard those particular situations where trust is broken or trust is gained. And it's so glad that Craig's here to show more of like, this is what we're actually hearing in real live calls. So that's, I think, very, very powerful for today. And then what are some techniques that we can use to build more value from every call that we take? And then again, we're going to have stats, have the metrics to back all of this up. And also, we really think it's important to have a question and answer period, and we've saved that for the end of the webinar today. And at the very top of your screen, you'll see an icon that says Q&A. At any time, feel free to click on that and type in your question there. And at the end, our colleague Mandy, who's doing all the magic behind the scenes here, will provide those questions for us, and Craig will do his best to answer, and I'll do my best to answer if we can. And don't be afraid to ask those tough questions too. So with that being said, I'm so glad to have Craig with us today. I got the great opportunity to meet him personally at the ICCFA experience earlier this year. And we have so much in common. It's like, okay, I've got to get back to our customers because we've got so many great things that we need to talk about. And so now here we are together today to share some of the magic and some cringeworthy stuff too, and what we need to think about with the phone. Okay, so I'll shut up now for a minute, Craig, and just tell me a little bit about who you are and what you feel is going to be an important thing that you can provide for our discussion here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nikki. I started off my career in venture capital, one of, and always been obsessed with that customer experience. I started off at a company called Pet Food Direct, which is now Chewy.com. And we always, and if you ever have, seen any reviews about Chewy.com, it's all about the customer experience. If, people say my pet passed away and I received flowers from them without anything. So from very early on, even before CX was even a thing, I really loved that customer experience. I was looking for a change in my career, getting out of that corporate world. I happen to be Spanish bilingual, and ASD was looking for a Spanish bilingual person to help answer their phone. So I started here, and the amazing thing about ASD is that everybody starts as a call specialist. It's the fundamentals of what we do. You have to be able to answer the phone and talk to a family with compassion and understanding. And you can't move up in the company if you don't understand, the those basics. In the pandemic in 2020, all of us were on the phones. We stopped everything that we were doing because we went from averaging 1,500 death calls a day to 4,500 death calls a day.
Wow.
So yeah, I personally have handled spoken to over 100,000 families. We keep metrics on all of those calls. So yeah, I have 9 years of experience here in the death care profession, and have really made it, I won't do anything outside of this profession from here on out. And the nice thing is, oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I celebrate 35 years this year, and you must have been 12 when you got started if you listened to 100,000 calls. That's amazing, though. Yeah, anyway, thank you for what you do. But okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. And thank you for all the nice things. And we started working with Dead Ringers, and it's been a while now, and what you guys provide is second to none. And why we do that is, you can't manage what you don't measure. So, measuring ourselves and our callers, our competition, and just funeral homes in general, and what you provide as a third party kind of non-discrimination and just providing the facts is really important, and your portal is amazing. So thank you for what you do as well. On that note, I have been told, and the amazing thing about these sessions, when we talk about, data-driven conversations, these are not my opinion. They're not Nikki's opinion. It's really based on the numbers, and you have to look at your numbers. So based on your numbers, Nikki, can you tell us, who performs better, a funeral home with an answering service or a funeral home that answers themselves, and why, if you could?
Yeah. So from our data, almost 15% of the calls that we place, out through our raw database of calls are calls that are answered by some kind of answering service. So it could be you, it could be a local firm that someone's worked with, any other kind of providers within the profession. So of all of our calls, about 15% of those are answering service calls. That being said, when that happens, 70% of the time we will get a live person, which I think is great. Sometimes, which I think if I were a family member calling in to business, whether it's an answering service or not, to get a recorded message, there's some trust that gets lost, I think, in that. But overall, we see the calls that we place that end up in an answering service more or less always perform better. And it's simple little things. 100% of the time, when we have an answering service answer a call, we get the name of the person that's calling. We get the information whether or not a loss has occurred, and we get the name of the loved one. Now, you would think, you would think a funeral home, when we're calling in and asking questions, our ringers as they place a call, that those are the three things that would be happening as a part of that. But it just doesn't happen. So 35% of the time when we're calling in and asking for information from a funeral home, and our statistics also do include cemetery, pet loss, mainly funeral homes, that only 35% of the time are we getting asked what our name is, asked if a loss has occurred. And if we are getting a name, only 57% of the time are we getting a phone number to do a callback. So if anything, learning, imagine I've hired an answering service as a funeral home owner or manager, and that answering service takes a call and doesn't get a name.
Yeah.
Why aren't we holding our own people to that standard? So-and-so called, well, did you get their name? And we'll talk about this in a little bit, right, Craig? And Price Shoppers, that opportunity, and I know that you get a lot of those calls too, when people turn the phones over to you. I remember hearing that. We've switched the phones over, we've forwarded the phones, those kinds of things. But we aren't doing the basics, where your answering service, they're not going to do you any favors if they're not providing that really key data.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, once we are working with an answering service, our ringers, as they place the calls, In some instances, we're transferred directly to a funeral director from you. Even we're not having to have a callback, which I think is really nice too. And those calls are much better received because when that funeral director then picks up the line from that transferred call, they have the name, they have the person that's passed or whatever the situation might be, they have callback information. And so we call that a warm transfer. And a warm transfer means that the process as that happens, it's much better than me as a consumer having to repeat all of that information again when I've given it to someone else. And so you build that trust like we talked about, and that you have a name, you provide condolences if that's the particular situation that's in mind. So those are just little things that if you moved just asking for names, the experience is better. So I hope that you found those particular statistics enlightening. I have tons more that I could share, but those are the really simple things that funeral homes can do. And even if you do get a name from a transfer, don't ask for the information again. You have it right in front of you. A family should never have to repeat information. You know, that's kind of one of our, when we train, people should never have to repeat a calls or, you know, the information. So another thing that we've learned from answering services is they do a much better job, and you've been trained by your clients to talk about the location and any value statement that is behind that particular funeral home. So about 57% of the time when an answering service does take a call, they state the location name and what any kind of value statement may be based on what the customer asks. So you keep a lot of information, I'm sure, in your systems about the uniqueness of each of your clients. And you do a better job as an answering service in being able to articulate what value you bring to families. And that particular statistic, only 43% of the time do funeral homes really stick to a good discussion about who they are and what value that they bring. So it's not just, did they say my name? It's more of the soft stuff, the things that make families feel good and build trust. So I think that's really key. And another thing that's kind of shocked us over the years, let's just say, how much does it cost to do a cremation there? That's a consumer and they're calling in that particular, getting that question, and we'll get, well, our direct cremation is, has a death occurred? Who's calling? And so 84% of the time when we're calling an answering service of any, or calling an answering service answers, 84% of the time we're getting asked if a loss has occurred versus about 74% of the time on the funeral side. That's the number one question that doesn't seem to be getting asked all the time. So there's that particular stat. And then one other thing, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, that 51% of the time or so, we're getting condolences offered from an answering service versus actually 61% of the time, 62% of the time, funeral homes do provide condolences. So there is that, it's not necessarily everything that you do in answering service is going to provide that, but these are stats that I think is important for you to know, and anyone else out there that might be an answering service, is that condolences or showing, the sorry that a loss has occurred, or maybe it's an imminent situation. So that's one piece that's really surprised us as a company, is sometimes the lack of empathy. So I'll stop with all of the numbers now, and then I'll turn it back over to you.
So now that we've kind of determined that it's probably a good idea,
yes.
In a 24/7, 365 day business to have some sort of service. So what should you look for in a service? And again, this is not going to be my opinion. This is based on, I've kind of numbered them based on when funeral directors call me and say, I need to change my service right now because of X, Y, and Z. So the number one reason is hold times, wait times. I don't think, this is my opinion, but a family that could be making the worst call in their entire life should never be placed on hold. 15 rings, not knowing if someone's going to answer, especially if it's late at night. Our job is to comfort that family, is to say, hey, come to my funeral home and I'm going to take care of you. And part of a customer experience is getting to them as soon as possible. So if you're choosing an answering service, they should 100% know what their ring to answer ratio is. Here, it's super important to us. We have a 95% first ring answer, and we put it on every call. We put it on every call. We're 100% transparent with that. But
I'm just an aside here. 20% of our callers are on hold for at least a minute 30 longer. So that may not sound like a long time, but if I've just lost a loved one and I'm sitting on hold for that long, when we'll talk a little bit more about that, but our statistics show that particular metric in that area. And in the research that we have done, and it not just in the profession, but the number one reason people hate calling a business is being put on hold. So I think it's so important that you have those particular measurements. Now you mentioned a hold, ring to hold. Is that ring to hold ratio?
Ring to answer.
What do you feel is ring to answer? What do you think the sweet spot is there? Like how many rings?
I would say by 3 or 4 rings you should be.
Okay, concerned. All right. Okay, I'm saying the right things when I train then, so just clarifying that. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I think we really need to take a hard look at our hold times, and so okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
But if you do choose a service and they do during checkout, or if they do have certain hold times, you just want to make sure that there is no music in the background. You cannot control what kind of music is. And I've had several funeral directors call me that said, I just was on hold with my funeral director and AC/DC's Highway to Hell was playing in the background. And of course, his first call after was to me, was to ASD. We don't place any music, anything like that. Again, that customer experience, making someone that is trusting you with their hardest times, you got to make sure that something so horrible isn't playing in the background during that time. Good song, but and so the number 2 reason that people change answering service, or funeral directors change answering service, is not the call specialists don't have enough experience with funeral homes. And not only the terminology, right? Whether it be a retort, cremains, a columbarium, and asking, what is that? But also the training on the mentality of that caller. Say someone calls and the call specialist asks, what's the call concerning? And the caller says, oh, I just wanted to know if you have a handicap ramp. Or a nice sweet old lady says, oh, I'm calling about my bill. These are experiences where we've, in the very beginning, have lost death calls, because if someone's calling about their bill, it could be an invoice or it could be their husband bill. If someone is calling about the handicap ramp, it's because, oh, my sister passed away and Aunt May is in a wheelchair. So we have to know that during distressing times, people might not come out and say, my aunt passed away. There always has to be that kind of probe of, has someone passed away? And that way you're protecting all of your calls and your business opportunities. So having experience in not only terminology, but where that caller is at that time, and to be able to guide them through that, through what you're saying to them, and through probing questions, just to make sure that we're being a good extension of that funeral home.
I think it's when you mentioned some of the terminology that we use, it kind of popped some things into my head, and we've kind of tracked in all of the calls that we had that there's kind of a theme of 5 things that happen that can extinguish a good customer experience. And one is the lack of empathy. We've kind of already talked about that. Long hold times is another thing that we see. Another is missed opportunities where people are, especially with price shoppers, we're missing the buying signals, I guess you could say. So that's something that we see happen. The other thing that we see happen is that we tend to be much more transactional and clinical than relationship or relational. So that's a theme. And then the other is we provide confusing information. So you mentioned the word retort. You know, these are not the kind of, we need to know what those things are, but when you say those kinds of things to a consumer, it can become very confusing. We hear acronyms a lot, GPL. Direct cremation, that is our terminology. That's not a consumer's terminology. So I think that's important, whether it's an ancillary service or our own staff, is that we steer clear of our vernacular and talk to someone on their level. So I think I just wanted to kind of point out those particular things, because I think from what I learned from you as we talked about the study and some of the things that you're doing, the same themes hold true in the calls that you've recorded and listened to. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. So the third thing from a customer experience, when funeral directors want to improve their customer experience with an answering service, is technology. And we do that through integrating with websites and case management system and our own technology here in-house. If someone calls for service information or directions or to recommend a florist, we should be able to provide that information without bothering the funeral director. The consumer should be able to have that right away, regardless who they're talking to. So we can actually text them directly into the OBIT. So they have right there, text the caller. They can go and see who you recommend for florist. They can see the whole OBIT and the service times. For directions, we can text them a pin to where the service location is. And again, from a customer experience standpoint, is they don't have to write it down. They can share that with other people in their family. Again, we're just taking one thing off of that caller's plate. So number 4, which is becoming more and more common, is to have bilingual call specialists. You know, it's about 20% now, and it's growing every day, of the United States is Hispanic. It's 19.5%, but it is growing really quick. Now, this is a culture who is really has deep-rooted traditions of honoring the deceased. So you want to be able to serve these families. It's really a new demographic for firms that aren't serving those families. I have personally done full arrangement meetings and repatriation, just translating over the phone. And it makes a world of difference to that family. It makes them feel like their needs are being met. Mm-hmm.
Those are great statistics. And I remember in a future life, it's like, well, we don't have very diverse community, and we would actually do population and demographic information in a mapping kind of setup. I'm like, no, you do. You need to understand your market. So, I mean, I think you really make a good point in that they are traditional consumers. And, you know, a lot of times I hear in a lot of conversations, that where consumers are moving away from kind of the traditional funeral. And this is a really great target market if you were to think of it in that way. So we've got 4 things that you've shared with us. What else do you have for us?
So from a funeral home perspective, from a management perspective, right? You want to make sure all your calls are recorded. You want to hear exactly what's happening on those calls. And when we're going back to seeing, you can't manage what you don't measure. Specialized reporting. So if you're getting 25 pre-need calls after hours, and only 8 need families are signing contracts, or 12 are coming in, you got to be able to manage that stuff. See what's going on. Are things being missed? So you just be able to provide, your answering service should be able to provide reports on what kind of calls are coming in and why. And from a really high level, when we're really getting into customer experience, if you are serving a family and multiple families are calling in about the same subject after hours, say, well, we had a question on the death certificate, or we had a question on the obit. You can change your messaging to say, hey, the family shouldn't be calling. We didn't do a good job of our messaging to say, hey, this is how it handles. So again, families shouldn't have to call. So if this situation is coming up on multiple families, you can just do something as simple as changing your messaging, or giving them a handout so that they're completely familiar with how the process works. And again, we talked about dispatching. How long does it take to get a call? How long did it take to dispatch those removals? When did the callback come? Just being able to measure everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned, knowing the types of calls that come in. And I know I get asked this all the time, and it's something that we're trying to beef up within our library of training and things, but it's the shopper calls. How do I convert these shopper calls? And so we're working on that. And a lot of things that we've already talked about, it's, building rapport, asking good questions, and steering away from kind of the transactional part of this, and thinking, if a price shopper called you, you have to get a name, right?
Yeah.
You have to get those things to then place that over to the funeral home. So you'd mentioned a study that you did a while back, and what kind of insights did you gain as far as shopper calls are? And then I'm going to learn some from you today as well of what can we keep in mind, what the numbers are telling us as far as shopper calls are concerned.
Absolutely. So we have to practice what we preach at ASD. So we got to look at our own data. So the way this really got started was, in 2012, we were averaging about 2,000 of these shopper calls a month throughout our clients. In 2022, that jumped up to almost 11,000 shopper calls per month.
Per month?
Per month. Yep, per month. The
Wow.
interesting thing was that of that initial shopper call, 18% of those callers were calling another funeral home that we were answering for. So when I started to put the data together, I really wanted to know what was going wrong on that first call. I wanted to make sure we were not doing something wrong, of course, to make the caller call another funeral home and another funeral home. And the NFDA did a study as well and their number's a little higher from a consumer standpoint, that about 20% call multiple funeral homes before making a decision. Now, what really kind of triggered me to go into this a little and dive in a little deeper is if you look at the numbers, 18 years from now, there's going to be 1 million more deaths than we have today, right? Those numbers the deaths are going to significantly increase by 2040. It looks like if you do the math, each firm should be getting about 50 more cases a year if you divide them equally across the 20,000 funeral homes. So how can we really make sure that we are delivering a clear, concise message of what the funeral homes offer, that not everybody's going to direct cremation? So I did. I went in and because ASD through our mobile app, funeral homes can call a family back, and those calls stay recorded. Or if the warm transfers, as you called them, if we patch a funeral director into the call, when someone's asking about pricing, those stay recorded as well. Just from a customer, management standpoint and a customer experience standpoint, the funeral home owners, managers, and yourselves can go back and listen to what was said on those calls. So I went and I listened to 500 calls, and I kind of found what the issue was, and I'm sure you see this every day. No condolences. People are not asking the name of the caller. We're not building rapport with the caller, and we're just listing line items. And it was very common. It was almost like everybody was going through the same handbook. And I do think, and I give everybody grace. I love funeral directors. I truly believe in our clients and firms and what they offer families. And this was in 2022 where we're just, getting through a very hard time within the profession. And the FTC had started their sweeps, right? So as you guys know, there are certain things that you need to say on the call. And it sounded like everybody was just trying to meet those FTC requirements and not really listen to what the family was asking. So no condolences, zero rapport. We were just covering line items. And there was no differentiating factors, right? So if you're calling two funeral homes and asking for your price, and they just give you your prices, of course they're going to go with the cheaper price because you did not give them anything else that differentiates you from the low-cost provider. There was a lot of... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Paul Masters, I think a lot of you out there know who he is. But he owns our company, and he's done a lot of research around cremation and things like that. And kind of his take on this is that when a consumer calls in and asks for the price of a cremation or funeral, whatever that might be, that is probably the only leverage they feel they have as a consumer, because they don't know the process. And we are being so literal in answering those questions. It's okay, even with FTC, to ask questions. It's just, a plug for our training. Go watch our webinar on this. It's consumers. We assume that everyone wants the lowest cost option, but that's not necessarily true. And if I do call two places, well, I don't know the difference between these, so I am going to choose the lower cost option, as you just mentioned. So we need to be able to differentiate those things. And one of the exercises that we suggest that our clients do is, like, when you get someone that says, well, I called so-and-so funeral home and they're a lot less expensive than you, we need to play nice in the sandbox. Well, okay, I understand that. Can you tell me a little bit about what was discussed? I want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples here. And, there's probably a much more eloquent way for us to say that, but we just run right into, we're not differentiating. We just provide the answers there. And some mentors to me in the profession who do a really great job is that we're doing a disservice to the family by not, telling them what's involved. Just for bottom line, everything, it's our own fault. It's not that the consumer they're changing and all of this. And I'm sure there may be some folks out there that disagree with that, but we are creating a commodity by treating it like a commodity. So anyway, I really appreciate what you've shared so far. So that being said, we suggest that our firms do what's called a best only list. And so when you get those calls and someone says, well, I talked to another funeral home and this is their price, getting into a discussion, well, we do this, no one else does this in the market. Your best only list. And we can't create that for you. You have to take a hard look, at what it is that you do. And it may be technology, your video capabilities. It's, everyone on our staff has celebrant training, or, what is it that truly differentiates you? Having good staff does not differentiate you, because everybody has good staff, has good funeral directors. Again, it's taking a really hard look at what it is that you have to offer. And something just came back to me too, Craig, and as we were preparing for today, is that we spend lots and lots of money on marketing.
Yeah, that was my next.
So segue. Okay, I'll let you take it from there.
So yeah, the last couple of things was no follow-up and missing. What made them call? What If you're just saying, okay, this is our cremation prices, hang up, we didn't get a name, a phone number. Well, you paid a lot of money to get that call coming in. So one thing that I like to say, and we're getting kind of into the solutions here, is are you familiar with our firm? Or have we served a family member of yours before? That kind of breaks down a wall, and gets them to open up. It's an open-ended question. And that way you can go and say, oh, well, yeah, you provide excellent services or you're the lowest price. What are they really looking for without asking them what are they really looking for? So we got to kind of use some of these techniques. And yeah, it's easy for me. I'm traditionally trained in sales, so it seems easy, especially, but it's not, because funeral directors are trained to be funeral directors, to comfort the family. And there's been a couple of situations where maybe they're scared now, and we just have to get back into really loving what we do and knowing our value. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was listening to the calls,
Okay.
a family was calling in saying, we're XYZ religion. We have to have a 1-hour viewing per our religion before he's cremated. Now, it was a cremation. The funeral director was trying to talk them out of it, say, oh, well, you don't want to pay for embalming if it's only for an hour. It really made me understand where we were as a profession in that time, where that funeral director had lost his ability to trust himself and lost his value, right? They said, we need this because it's our religion. And he was so fixated because initially they asked about price, right? But everybody's going to ask about price initially because they don't know what else to ask. So yeah, it really opened my eyes. That case study was very interesting. And like you said, Nikki, I don't think it's the consumer. I think it's us.
Yeah. I'm with you that I love funeral directors. I'm not one, but I play one on TV kind of thing. No. And so I don't want you listening think that we're beating you up, because that's not it. We are on a mission to create really good experiences, and it starts with the phone call. And we talked about marketing dollars. Why are you spending all this money that if you are driving business to the funeral home and the beautiful marketing doesn't match up with a beautiful phone experience, there's a real disconnect there. And so, from an answering service perspective, I think it's important, right, that you have those kind of relationships with your clients to understand who they are, other than just an address, the price list and those particular things. So if you're going to make those investments in marketing, doesn't matter who you use, if that you have the solid phone skills to back up, business being driven in that way. And we have
not
clients
only
too,
that, but also because if you're not measuring it, then how can you invest into more of what's working and scale back on what's not working? If you're not measuring the dollars of where they're coming into, it's again, you can't measure, whatever the saying is.
Yeah. No,
you can't manage what you don't measure. So if you're spending $8,000 a month on SEO or Google AdWords, those calls are coming in and you're not documenting it, then you really need to be able to own in on that specific marketing strategy.
Yeah, what we do is not easy. And I am so grateful every day for the things that this profession does. And it's, we do such a great job once we're face to face with families, but we need to have that visualization when the phone rings, that it's the same kind of thing. And I think too that we've learned over the years is that you mentioned, about 20% of the market is a Latino, or, any other kind of group that has different needs that maybe we aren't addressing, is that we're much more, what's the word I'm looking
diverse?
For? We're transient too.
Oh, okay,
There's no
yeah.
longer, I grew up in rural Indiana, and my family's still going to use the same funeral home that they've used for years. We're just not seeing that across the board as much anymore. And, we're going to get those families. I don't know how many times I've heard that. I'm like, well, not necessarily. You know, the GI generation has moved along. The silent generation is now kind of who, a lot of deaths are occurring in that area. And the boomers have changed everything, and they're not as loyal as they used to be. So we can't make assumptions that phone skills aren't an important part of what we do. And I think it's very interesting, and it's that having an answering service can really make a big difference, and that you're getting the basics that you need to have a good conversation.
Nikki, do you mind
Yep,
one second?
yep,
So you guys are the experts in the FTC, and I think it can be confusing to funeral directors. We always talk about, okay, if someone calls in and says, can I please have your price on a direct cremation? Are you allowed to ask a question before giving the price?
absolutely. What we suggest is I'll absolutely be providing you that particular information. May I ask, has a loss occurred? Just a simple question like that, just to kind of slow things down. Now, you asked about our direct cremation. That is a pointed question. Now, if I called in and said, how much does it cost to do a funeral there? That's a wide ranged question versus a very specific question. And so let me tell you a little bit about what our offering is. Our lowest cost option is what we call our alternative cremation, or whatever everyone has a name for a certain package, and that you provide the price of that information and what's included in that and what's not included. And I think then that not included, category then can lead you into other things. Now, if you are interested in a service with this, the additional, to get you talking about those particular things. So it's like what's not included, but then let me talk you a little bit more about that. And they may say, nope, we just want what's the cheapest. The family will guide you. And I think, you might have mentioned this, let our families guide us sometimes versus, us guiding them. Now, from an FTC perspective, we have to have specificity. Thank you, Paula Masters. We have to make sure that everything is accurate. So, those are the two things that the FTC that they're looking for. So I just did an FTC training yesterday, and I think it's okay to ask questions. What the FTC is looking for is that it's accurate information. And, what we can't say is, well, it's on our website. It may be on your website, but you still have to address the question that was asked. We find that the next step there is, now that I've covered these prices with you, would it be okay if I email you, our general price information, or if you provided kind of an estimate what that might be? Oh, and if you have additional, questions, all of this information is on our website versus using that as a tool to get someone to your prices. So, but yes, I probably made that a much longer answer than I needed to be, but it's okay to ask questions.
Yeah.
It's just that you need to be sure if there's a specific question like that, how much is, your lowest cost casket? You have to provide, your lowest cost casket, but we know that we offer a lot of different things as well. Would you be interested in sitting down with me to learn more about that? But I think the very first thing is when someone asks prices, has a loss occurred? Yeah. What we tend to do is say, well, our direct cremation is. Nowhere did that consumer say. If the consumer calls in and says it's a direct cremation, most likely they've been calling other funeral homes who use that terminology, or it's someone like Dead Ringers. Those are our particular terms. So I think there's also some things that can help you, as a funeral director, the types of questions people are asking. Direct cremation, I've seen it on billboards and things like that, but that's our term. That's not necessarily one that may resonate with the consumer. So the first question is, has a loss occurred? May I ask to who I am speaking? Those are kind of questions that you're totally fine to, and those, even though that you may not, the conversation may not lead into more about pricing and things like that, you are showing that you care. And we've heard calls and we've heard things from funeral directors that say, well, I know that you were more expensive, but you took the time to answer my questions. It's those little things, it's the little things that matter. And if we're not taking those little steps, we lose those price shoppers. So those are just some things that we've learned on our end. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So as a solution, 100% your answering service can provide your pricing. Um, we've talked with Paul over this. There's no rule against your answering service not providing pricing. So you should provide your pricing to your answering service. What we would love to do is text the caller, because again, from a customer experience standpoint, where if you're just talking over, you're expecting them in a distressed state to write down all this information. It can get confusing. Their phone reception can be bad. I had on the case study, when I was listening to those calls, I had a lady scream at the funeral director because he was going over the cost of the funeral director's services. And she said, "I told you I didn't want any services." So again, it's being able to really give them and educate the caller in their terms. So if we text them, your best packages, your GPL, that way they can send that information to their family without having to write it down, and spend time on, have you used us before? Have we served a family member of yours? Kind of break down that barrier. I'm so sorry for your loss. And then once you have that information, you can follow up, because if you don't, so many people are not getting the name of the caller, the name of the deceased, or a follow-up phone number. They were just like, oh, it out into thin air, that marketing strategy. Imagine if I got a funeral director calling me and I didn't ask any of that information, I'd get fired. But again, if funeral directors are now, you have to be an expert, and we have to be experts at providing our pricing to families in a compassionate way.
Yeah. One thing that I've observed as I've worked with funeral homes, some say we don't want anyone to know that we have an answering service. And so I think that being transparent is important in that, and that it's okay that you have an answering service. And I think what you do have is that you have someone there 24/7 to answer a call. There is no shame in having an answering service. And I don't know if there's any, I've heard, hanging out with my funeral director friends, like, I can't go out tonight because I'm on call. And so it can be draining. And I don't know if there's other things that you might be able to share here, and that some of those non-tangibles that having an answering service can help with as you run your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So basically, your question, about 50% of our firms ask us not to say specifically you're the answering service or not the answering service. It's just a personal decision. We offer something pretty cool that is called our First Call Connect, where, say, the funeral director is out to dinner with his family, her family, out with friends. They'll get a text message just to let them know that there's a death call in progress. It gives them a couple minutes to stand outside, get ready. It'll have the caller's name, phone number, and the name of the deceased, so they're ready when they get that call.
There's a program out there literally about funeral director burnout, and I forget who. I think it's Justin Troyer. There's someone within the profession that has a program, and that's sad that we experience burnout. It's a very, very tough profession, and whether it's you or anyone else, kind of take that burden off your staff, so when it's a face-to-face situation, they're at their best.
Yeah.
To handle the situations.
I use the analogy, what if our 911 call center also responded to the calls? There's so much, when you're have to be on call every minute of every day to carry a person through the worst time of their life, that is your calling, but that does not mean that you have to talk to someone who's doing a family tree at 3 a.m. in the morning because your website says you're always available, or someone that waited last minute to get a death certificate from 30 years ago. That is not your responsibility. Yes, that's customer experience. They can wait for a call back the next day. You have to be 100% ready and fresh for the families who need you, and everything else can wait.
That's awesome. Gosh, it's already what, 9? I could talk to you forever about this stuff, but we do want to open up the lines for some questions and answers. Before we get into that though, Craig, anything else that you'd like to add before we get into the Q&A?
No, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out directly. You can call the 800 number and I'll answer. So,
okay,
yeah,
awesome.
Whatever you need.
Okay, that's great. All right, so let me see what we have here. Oh, this is a good one. How do you think AI, artificial intelligence, will affect answering service offerings, and is it already happening?
Yeah. So we use AI on our back end. We use it when we talk about customer experience, right? So while the call is going on, AI now transcribes what the caller is saying, what the call specialist is saying, and the funeral directors can access all that. So when we talk about making a caller repeat things, right? We don't have to do that anymore as much because AI is kind of transcribing those whole calls. Our perfect answer, which is when you have such a high volume of calls, and some funeral homes names are DeAngelo, Konefkis. You don't want the call specialist to start off the call sounding like they don't represent your firm. So we've always pre-recorded those. It's just part of our algorithm to make, again, the most important part is to answer that call on the first, second, third ring. Now with AI, we can clone someone's voice and it will sound exactly like the call specialist who answered it. It can get robotic.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of things. I think in the future, opening up case management. There are some privacy stuff that I'm concerned about.
Okay.
I don't, that'll make it easy. Can you print out a death certificate from this? Well, your CRM will tell us if it's able, and all of that becomes instantaneous. So yeah, AI will play a huge role. Now for actually taking the calls, and this is where we run into, I get this question all the time. How do you think we're doing now? And is that going to elevate the level of service that you are providing your families? So if someone calls and, what's the call concerning? Oh, my bill. Or, do you have handicap parking? Yes, we have handicap parking available. Do they know to ask, has someone passed away? Those little nuances can get us into a lot of trouble. The devil's in the details, and I don't think we're ready for it now. In the future, who knows? But I think you have to look at what your goals are, what our goals are as a profession, and are we trying to elevate the service that we provide our families, or are we trying to become more cost effective? So we are using it in ways to help customer experience right now.
Let's see. Now, anyone else, feel free to go to the Q&A at the top. That's the only question that we have right now. I'll give it just a couple of minutes, a minute or so to do that. I am trying to find when our next webinar is while you guys are doing that. Maybe Mandy can go into the chat. I thought I wrote that down, but I didn't. It's in August. It's next month. It's at 3 p.m. Mandy, if you don't mind putting that out in the chat for me, I'd greatly appreciate it. I hate getting old. Here she comes. Okay. Our next webinar is August 31st at 3 p.m. And we will have any kind of marketing and emails and all of that stuff going out. But you may want to mark that on your calendars right now. We will have a topic here soon to announce. And with that being said, for those of you who listen to our webinars, if there's a certain topic specifically around phone etiquette and creating customer experiences that you would like to see, we have a lot of good resources and people like you, Craig, that we can count on to give us really good content there. So August 21st, that's a Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So watch your inboxes for more detail around that. All right, folks, any other questions before we break here today? Looks like that's about it. So again, Craig, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge. And you're right. How do you know if it's working if you're not measuring it? And I think, we can talk anecdotally about stuff all the time, but I think as a business, to know that something's really working, measuring it is key. So again, from Dead Ringers, thanks to ASD and for Craig for making the time here for us today. For those of you who are interested in providing feedback or additional topics that you'd suggest, our email is info@deadringers.co. And that goes right into all of us at the team here. And we look forward to any kind of feedback. You will be receiving a survey after the topic here today. So please complete that. It really helps us to improve on what we do. Of course, we measure everything. So that being said, thanks, Craig. Thanks so much. And everyone enjoy the rest of your July. I can't believe it's July. And we will see you next month on the 21st at 3 p.m.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.